Dopey.
Thank you very, very much. I'm so grateful to be here, not just in the group, but grateful to be here and be alive today. So it's been quite a journey, I should say. I started my bad habits, as I call them, and I refer to them that way on my podcast in about 8th grade. So I started drinking pretty aggressively and consistently in 8th grade. And I grew up in an alcoholic household. My father was an alcoholic, but I don't blame him, right? I mean, I did for a very long time, and it led to no good. It led to bad choices and me kind of being the default result of my dad's bad habits, which is crap, right? Is it okay, Mike, if I swear from time? Is that okay? Okay. It was my own bullshit getting in the way, right? And I tried everyone else's problems or challenges to be my truth or my problem, and try to blame others and all the stuff that, everyone on the call today has probably heard or been through themselves. But my dad was an alcoholic, and he was an aggressive alcoholic. And by that, I mean, would get up in the morning and crack a bottle of brandy or whiskey or whatever it was and go top to bottom in 15 seconds, the whole thing. And, was a very hardened Special Forces Marine from Vietnam, Silver Star winner, and he carried a lot of that home with him. Purple Heart, multiple Purple Hearts. And I say that because it took me a long time to understand that he was dealing with his own pain and struggling through a lot of things that weren't his fault, that happened in the war, that he carried home with him. And I'm not justifying anything. I'm just saying that it wasn't like today where it was more open armed to go get help for those kinds of things that happened to the soldiers in war. So he carried that burden with him. And as a result, he pushed out his anguish and his pain. And I was the culprit of a lot of that. So anyway, I learned very bad habits, right? Drinking and smoking and whatever else it might be. At the time, it was just alcohol and cigarettes. And so this is 8th grade. My friends and I would go every Friday and Saturday and get blackout drunk for whatever liquor we could find in anybody's liquor cabinet in anyone's house. And we would begin drinking. And that went with me for a very, very long time, 40 plus years, as once I get through and through my story. But I continued to do that. And then I'd finally had enough, and I couldn't deal with some of the challenges and trauma that was coming with and through my father. So I went to live with my mom in Chicago. And this was my dad and my family and I grew up they came from Italy, and then we were down in like South Central Illinois, not too far, a couple hours drive from Chicago. But anyway, I went to go live with my mom. And, bouncing around from high school to high school, trying to find your place, your niche, right? You just do what's comfortable. And that was drink. And I picked up smoking. So that was about 16 years old. And I rode that horse for a very long time. I went from really good grades to absolutely terrible academically. But somehow I managed to get my stuff together and off to college. I'm skipping some things that don't matter. I'm going to get to the heart of the recovery issues here. So I go off to college, and then the drinking really, really, really blew up. I mean, that was drinking every Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, pretty much every single day. And then I had the ultimate job. I was a bartender in college. So I got to know every bar, every bartender, every restaurant, drank pretty much for free, and did that constantly. I have really no idea how the hell I graduated from the University of Iowa. I barely went to class, but somehow I did. I managed to get my degree. And I carried that kind of that aggressive drinking for a very, very long time. And this time, it still, at this point in my life, it felt very, very social. And by that, I mean, it was I felt like it was just for fun. And I always felt like I was in control. Having a problem never occurred to me. It never felt like I was overdoing it ever. I mean, I never got hungover and all that. So I always kind of felt good. Of course, I'm very, very young at this point. So then after college, kind of continued on that path where we're socially drinking and socializing. I had a good job. I was making good money. I wasn't driving myself to the poorhouse, as it were. I had a home. I was married and all that good stuff. And the drinking just continued. I did stop during the week for the most part and just kind of kept it to the weekends for a long time. And it got progressively worse, where the drinking started right at 5 o'clock on Friday and carried all the way through till late Sunday afternoon. And then you'd have dinner and I would go to bed. And then all of a sudden I started realizing, maybe I'll start drinking on Thursday. So now I'm Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday. So now on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, then Monday night football kind of stuff. Go out with the fellas, do whatever it might be, and was drinking. And all of a sudden I realized I was pretty much drinking 4 or 5 days a week pretty consistently. It still wasn't, at this point in my head, it wasn't bad. It didn't even ring a bell. I wasn't concerned at all. I still wasn't missing work. I wasn't doing anything stupid in my mind. And go ahead and things happen. I get divorced, right? And but I'm looking back on it now. I realized it's because I wasn't available, because I was an alcoholic and I didn't even realize it yet. So I still hadn't connected the dots. So I went forward for a good 7 or 8 more years. And this is when it starts to get really, really bad, where I was drinking, I would say, 6-7 days a week, and all of a sudden the alcohol wasn't enough anymore. It turned into alcohol and cocaine and nicotine. And then as soon as the cocaine entered the picture, it became a rampage nightmare, because now I was awake. I could stay awake for days and keep drinking. And that's exactly what I did. And I hit it so hard for so long that my life completely spun out of control. There was a couple of gaps in there. So after my divorce, I kind of ran solo for a while. So I went right back to my old school college party ways, got a job bartending again, and went right back to my old habits. And I built up relationships, friendships with people from, I call it the industry, but from, bartending. So, the hospitality industry. And I would be up drinking all night long, after hours, every weekend. Still, now I'm back to not paying for drinks. So, and socially, everybody else was at that same level from an alcohol consumption perspective. So it still didn't feel very weird. And I kept rampaging it. And again, it was always who could drink the most, who could do the most shots, whatever it would be. And you were always kind of given this badge of honor for being able to party the longest, the hardest, the crazy shit that the kind of Hollywood style is the only way I can describe it. I'm not glamorizing it. I'm just trying to frame it a little bit from an intensity perspective. Then I managed to I'm not going to say get it together, but I took some life turns. I moved to Italy for a little while because I was pursuing something else from a career perspective. And I actually stopped drinking for a bit, a couple of years, if you could believe it. And I don't know why. Italy, the culture is quite a bit different. In from a day-to-day drinking culture. They drink wine, but a little bit of wine with dinner is not the same thing that we do, that I was doing here. So, but that kind of fell apart. I came back and I got a job. I was out of corporate America, and now I'm really hitting it hard. I started to really rampage with the blow and the alcohol, and do it so consistently that I would be up for days, still trying to maintain a normal lifestyle, but there was no such thing as normal. Everything I didn't even start until I drank a bottle of vodka, a 6-pack of beer, and a pack of cigarettes, and probably ripped half of an 8-ball. Then my night started. And that went on for years. And it turned into that kind of consistent, intense drinking at levels that, thinking back on it, I don't know how I survived. And I would go for days and days and days and sit there by myself after everyone had tapped out, passed out, left, cabbed home, whatever it was. And I always had a stash of booze. I always had a stash of blow, and I always had a carton of cigarettes. And I could keep going for days. And I did just that. I would sit on my porch. I'll never forget. I was renting this house because, I'm in the industry. I needed to be walking distance to the bar I worked at because I knew better that I could never be driving distance. It had to be walking distance because I would have killed myself or gotten a DUI for sure. So I was always walking distance to my job, and I would sit there and drink, sitting down on my porch just under the shot for the window so that people walking by couldn't see me, but I'd still be sitting on the floor drinking and smoking and partying, and people walking by living their life during the day couldn't see that I'm still up for 2-3 days here, going and going and going. Still, nothing bad's happening to me yet. I'm managing to pull this off. I've got my job back in the industry, but I'm keeping it together. I'm saving a little bit of money, nothing crazy. And I still don't feel like it's out of control. If you can imagine being able to stay up for 2 or 3 days, but stay drunk for 5, get a little bit of sleep, barely eat, and continues to get worse. I seem to shake it off. I have no idea how I got so lucky in that nothing bad physically is happening to me yet. I'm still managing to keep my job. And the worst part is I was the kind of drunk that people loved to have around. I was fun. People enjoyed spending time with me. I was never a mean drunk or an alcoholic at the time. So people enjoyed it. People always wanted to have me around. They would always buy me drinks, life of the party, all that crap. And this is going on now since, like I said, 8th grade. This is probably, now let's just skip ahead because we don't need to spend too much time on the horror stories. We've all heard all of that, but this is where it starts to get really, really bad. I get married again, and my wife, who I'm with now, thankfully, and I, we get pregnant. We have a baby boy who is now 8, and we also have another son who's 5. So we are now trying to live our life normally. We get pregnant. I go back to corporate America. I give up the job, and I actually managed to stop some of the drinking during the week again. And now I'm just back to the weekends, and this is going fine. But I didn't give up the drugs, and I didn't give up the cigarettes, and I'm still drinking. But my intensity for the 2 days that I wasn't drinking stayed the same. So I tried to pack in 5 or 6 days of drinking in 2 days. And somehow I pulled that off because with the blow, you could pretty much stay up, and nobody knows how drunk you really are if you know how to do the balance thing. And I did. So that's what I was doing. And this went on for years. So finally, one day I end up going to a Cubs game with a friend of mine. But before I get to this part of the story, my intensity went back to 6 to 7 days a week of absolute rampage drinking. But the thing that happened is I flipped. So my story went like in the morning, I would get up and start my day at 4 or 5 a.m. with 2 lines of blow and kick off my day. And then I would hit blow all day long until I could get to a respectable time of the day to start drinking, socially speaking. So then at 5 o'clock or 4:30, I would crack a beer, or I'd have a vodka rock splash of soda, whatever it was. And then I would pretend to socially drink that, right? My kids are there and everything. They don't know that I'm hitting the cocaine like that. Of course, my wife suspects it, but doesn't really know for sure. But let's not fool anybody. Everyone knows I'm the only one fooling myself here, right? Everybody knows how bad it is. I'm just trying to kid myself. And I did for a very long time. But what started to happen is I would stay up for 2 or 3 days straight, maybe get an hour of sleep in there somewhere, not too much, barely eating. But when I did eat, I would rampage eat horrible things. So I was starting to gain weight, oddly enough. And cocaine, it doesn't really mix too well. People think that you lose a lot of weight when you do a lot of blow, but sometimes that's not the case. It wasn't for me. And what started to happen is I never was getting any sleep, and my body was falling apart. I was constantly in a state of hangover because now I'm drinking, I would say sometimes a case of beer a day, at least a 12-pack a day, half a bottle of Tullamore Dew whiskey, at least a half a bottle, maybe sometimes a full bottle, and maybe half a bottle or a bottle of vodka, and then 2 packs of cigarettes and about $100 of cocaine a day, 7 days a week. And I would fake it and go sit in my garage and drink and drink and drink and drink. I never really passed out because I was so coked up that I never got off balance. But what started to happen is I started to get in my own head and get angry. And I started turning all of this negativity and anger that I had built up, that I've manifested in my head, and tortured myself and had other demons and holes to fill. But what starts to happen is now I'm in my garage by myself, ignoring my family, ignoring my work. I'd lost a couple of jobs, and everything starts to fucking unravel to the point where I can't keep up. I'm driving us financially into the hole because I'm blowing so much money on alcohol, cigarettes, and drugs that it's ridiculous. To the point that not only do I lose a couple of jobs, my wife and our relationship is falling apart. I'm distancing myself from my children, pretending to be a good father, terrible father, because I'm not making good choices. I'm, like burning the house down around me, metaphorically speaking. And then, by the grace of God, I go to a Cubs game with a friend of mine, back to the Cubs game. This is a Friday afternoon game. And I go, and you do what you do, right? I get up in the morning. I start doing blow. I start drinking. We start really drinking about 3:00 because we got to take the train from the burbs out, down to the city, which we do, and drink like rock star drinking all day at the Cubs game. Get home, and we get back to town. We start drinking a little bit more at the bars locally, and somehow get home. Don't really remember how, but I do. And the level of intensity from that day, I wake up in the morning and I'm really hungover. I managed to get some sleep, but then my finger, I felt like I had glass in my finger, or like a really bad sliver. And I'm like, my finger really hurts. And my wife was like, you're full of shit. You're just hungover again, and you're faking it. You're making something up so that I feel sorry for you. You can justify your bullshit, which normally would be 100% true. But this time it really wasn't. I was in a lot of pain. I couldn't figure out what it was. So my wife had to go to a baby shower, and I said, I'll stay home with the kids. And she took a picture of me, because she was busting my balls, and went home or went to the baby shower and was, angrily trying to make fun of me and joke around a little bit with her friends so that she could, blow some steam of her own, emotionally speaking, right? To kind of, here we go again kind of crap. But one of the mothers there happened to be a nurse and noticed on my arm that I had this line coming up my arm, and said, hey, you really should go home and tend to him because that's an infection. But so what's happening now is I went to sleep the night before, and or on that Friday night, and this is now Saturday, and I'm sweating so bad profusely that I'm soaking through my shirt, soaking through the sheets, soaking through the blanket I'm in. But I didn't put two and two together. But for about 2 weeks, as I'm sitting around the house doing stuff at night, I was sweating so bad that I just thought it was because I was constantly coked up and hungover or drunk. I didn't think anything of it. I wasn't in pain yet. But then the pain lands in my hand and starts to manifest. And then my wife comes home, says, hey, and I'm like, you have to take me to the hospital. And she's like, I know, I just talked to so-and-so's mom. I'm not going to say her name, but the nurse comes home. We get in the car, and my hand is now about twice the size it should be, and is pounding and throbbing in agonizing pain. And we go to the hospital, and I completely and fully assume I have a little tiny sliver of glass or something in my finger. It feels like or if anyone's played basketball and a ball bounces off a straight finger and you get that jammed feeling. But it was, in the intensity of it was debilitating. And I, again, still didn't think anything of it. Certainly didn't connect any of these dots. So then I get to the hospital. I said, my wife just drops me off because it's about 15 minutes, 10 minutes from the house, not even. And it's like an adjunct hospital to the parent hospital. And she drops me off. I said, I'll call you when I'm done, maybe to come and pick me up, go home with the kids, because we had babies at home, right? So they all went back to the house. And I'm in there, and the doctors, what's going on? I said, I think I broke my finger. I jammed my finger. There's something in my finger. So they take my blood pressure, and the nurse just stops and kind of looks up at me, looks down at the monitor, and looks up at me, and she goes, I'll be right back, and goes out. I'll never forget this. And the doctor, seconds later, kicks the door in John Wayne style, like, we have to admit you right now to the hospital. I said, and I'm like, hold on, doc. I said, you absolutely have the wrong room. I said, my finger hurts. Like, that's it. He's like, no. Your blood pressure is like 200 over 100. And that thing that you think is a finger, you have now got not only cellulitis, but they don't know this just yet, but I'm turning septic. And the infection has been eroding me from the inside they don't even know. They assumed over a month. And we don't even know how I got it. So he's like, we have to admit you right now. And at this point, I don't know how severe this is. And now I'm thinking about this. He goes, would you like to go in the ambulance, or do you want, can you get a ride? And the other hospital, the main hospital, is minutes away. I said, well, I'll get a ride. I'm going to save the $500 from the ambulance. And I'm in my head, it wasn't for any other reason. It's just like $500 is, I could buy a lot of drugs and alcohol with that. So I'll save the $500. And I get in the car and the doctor goes, hey, listen, do you smoke? I said, I do. He's like, do not have a cigarette on the way over from this hospital to the next one. You will stroke out or have a heart attack. He goes, your blood pressure is so high that medically speaking, you should absolutely be in the hospital or in an ambulance. He said, but promise that you won't smoke. And I still kind of half-assed don't believe him that, like, what he's telling me, because I don't feel any different than I had my whole life. This is 40 some years of this. I'm totally used to this. My body is this is part of what I do all the time, every day, every week. I always was in like a state of hangover, a state of lack of sleep, a state of over functioning alcoholism and cocaine addiction. So you have that kind of draggy feeling all the time. So I get there and they're waiting for me at this other hospital. Now, anyone from a bigger city knows that nobody's waiting for anybody unless you're really, really, really famous at a hospital at the front door. So they're waiting for me with a wheelchair. Are you Anthony? I said, I am. Get in this wheelchair. I'm like, are you kidding? Like, what are you talking? Everyone's losing their minds, in my opinion. So I get in there. They get me up to the room right away. But now my hand is absolutely throbbing. My arm is like bloated and it's starting to sag. And the pain is so excruciating that I'm starting to kind of brown out a little bit because my body is literally giving in at every level. So get up to the room and the room is overrun with doctors. I have a infectious diseases doctor. I've got the floor doctor. I've got an orthopedic surgeon, a team of nurses. They sit me up, throw me in this bed. They put my arms out and they tap me with 4 IVs with different kinds of concoctions to try to break the infection, because they don't know how bad the infection is. All they said is, this is one of the worst infections we've ever seen. We can't believe that you're not dead. You shouldn't be alive right now. And they said that pain that you're feeling is your body shutting down from your extremities into your core to protect your major functions of your brain and your core vitals. But the pain, what's happening is my left arm is dying. And the nerves go last. Apparently, I didn't really know that. And it's throbbing in brutal pain. So they tap me in and they can't figure this out. So 3 days go by and they can't break the infection. I'm losing the fight every day and it's getting worse. So just kind of using a balance, everyone has like a staph infection of some kind on them all the time. And it's just a normal course of our day-to-day life. But what happens is your body naturally can defend against that, fight it off, and everyone's fine. In my case, because my alcoholism, my drug addiction, and my smoking, and I'm now 40 pounds overweight and haven't taken care of myself for 40 plus years, my body's starting to lose the fight. It can't keep up because it's constantly fighting off what I've done to it through alcohol and drugs and smoking. So the doctor's like, you're just losing this fight. Like, by all rights, you should be dead. So 3 days in, they can't balance the infection, and all the antibiotics they're giving me and the cocktails of antibiotics aren't working. They're not catching up. They're not doing anything. So every time they take a blood sample to test whether or not it's having an impact, I'm losing. In fact, the infection's getting worse and worse and worse. Doctor comes in 3 days in and says, look, you're going to die. not going to make it out of here. So do what you have to do financially speaking. Say goodbye to your wife and your children. You're not going to make it. So I'm just telling you that. We're going to do everything we can for you, but you should prepare yourself that this is it. This is 3 days in. I'm like, well, this can't be right. Like, I can't go out like this. So meanwhile, I've done this to myself. Like, I blame no one. I can accept full responsibility for this nonsense that I've just created for myself. My children didn't choose this. My second wife didn't choose this. None of this. This is just me being a selfish asshole and doing everything I want to do on my own terms, in my own way. And this is, now I'm paying the piper. 40 some years, my body is literally collapsing in on itself because it can't keep up. So I get lucky. Somehow, by the grace of God, I end up with an orthopedic surgeon who happens to be one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the country, on rotation that day in the hospital. Comes in, and Dr. Welch, I'll never forget, says, listen, I'm gonna see what I can do for you. And he's like, let's schedule a surgery. So the next day we go in, he's like, I'm going to try to bleed you out a little bit of your infection. So we go into surgery. I sign the paperwork that you're supposed to sign. He takes me down there. And what he's going to do is cut my finger in a couple of places in my hand and push out kind of where the infection is living and residing mostly in my hand. It's all expressed itself on my left side, mostly where you could physically see it. The rest of my body kind of looked normal. And so he goes in, I'm under, comes back out, talks to my wife and says, hey, there's a really good chance we're going to have to amputate a very large part, if not his entire arm, if he doesn't bleed within a certain amount of time after I cut him open. And of course, my wife agrees and says fine and signs the paperwork to allow that to actually happen if it needs to happen. So he cuts my hand and he cuts my finger down the middle a little bit, kind of like if you were splitting a sausage that's too plump on the grill to kind of pull so it you can control and get it kind of back to normal before it pops uncontrollably, or like a hot dog overcooked in the microwave, that kind of thing where you slit it a little bit so it doesn't pop. So he does that. And I don't make the timing to start bleeding naturally because the infection is the cells in my flesh and in my body is so infected that it's not bleeding normally. It's overcome with this infection. So he actually goes and pushes it further than he should because he's a wonderful surgeon and he wanted to take the risk where other orthopedic surgeons would absolutely not do that. And I've talked to other orthopedic surgeons about this, not only while I was in the hospital, but since then. And they said, no, most orthopedics would have not done that, taking the risk that bad things with their career could happen if something goes wrong because he didn't follow protocol. So he doesn't follow protocol and manages to get me to bleed 5 or 10 seconds after the limit expires. And the blood's coming out. So he pushes out and expels a lot of the part of the infected arm and blood and the nasty pus and all that gross stuff out. And he cuts my hand in a couple of different places to help express all of those things. And I wake up and didn't have to amputate anything. I didn't know about the potential amputation at this point yet, but I wake up and my hand is gauzed and bandaged and everything. And then the next morning I've come to after I get done with the surgery, and the next morning on rotation, the surgeon himself, Dr. Welch himself, comes to undress and redress my wounds. The nurses could not believe it. They're like, who are you? Like, first of all, surgeons first don't do that. Like, they don't come back and dress normal wounds after surgery themselves. That's a nurse protocol. And I love nurses and physical therapists, but that's what they do. Surgeons don't do that. He comes himself and double checks his own work and undresses and redresses my bandages, which is insane. Worst part is I'm still not winning the infection, beating it. After now, every single day, 4 days, 4 IVs, so 2 IVs per arm going on these huge IV towers. I'm only off the towers about an hour a day, and that's it. And I point that out, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But so now I'm maybe 5 or 6 days in, still not beating it. and they can't figure out what the hell's going on. And they don't know what else to do for me from a cocktail perspective in terms of the antibiotics. They keep ramping it up and trying to change the dosage and the different structures and the timing and everything else. And finally, about one more day, the inflammation comes and it looks worse than it did when I got there, because now I'm cut open. So the wounds are oozing and expressing themselves in different ways. And I'm not able to get ahead of it. So that Dr. Welch, being as wonderful as he is, said, I'm going to go in for round 2. And I'm going to see if I can express more of this out of you through surgery then, because we can't seem to get you there with the antibiotics and the IV bags and all that stuff. So schedule a second surgery, but now I know about the potential for the amputation. And of course, I approve it. If absolutely, my wife approves that we go in, and I don't make the time a second time to bleed after his cuts in different parts of my hand. Don't make the time. And he manages to push it a little bit further to get me to bleed naturally beyond the time limit I should have made it. And he doesn't amputate anything. And what he said is they would start at your fingertips and start going like from a knuckle to the knuckle to the knuckle, half the hand, wrist, in a couple inches each cut until you bled normally from where they cut you. And that's where they amputate. So he said, potentially going in before the second one, he's like, you should prepare yourself to come out with no left arm at this point. It's pretty hard to take. So I managed to bleed. And he get back to my room, and my infectious diseases doctor is still working on different cocktails from the IV perspective to help fight. And the next day I level off, meaning the infection is not getting worse. It stayed the same, which is a huge win, because at this point, every day they're checking, I'm losing and losing the fight. So the infection is getting worse and worse and worse. And so that's a positive thing. So now I'm like 7 or 8 days. And keep in mind, open heart surgery patients leave the hospital after 3 days on normal cycles. So I'm 7 or 8 days in already. And now they take me off the IVs every single day for an hour to switch things off, give me a chance to stretch out a little bit. And my entire life, I've not really exercised. I haven't done anything. So I figured, I'm going to try something different. Now keep in mind, I haven't had a drink, a cigarette, or cocaine since the day that I woke up that Saturday after that Friday from the Cubs game, because I was in so much pain. So I've got a handful of days under my belt at this point. And I figured I'm going to take advantage of being in the hospital. And I would go every time they took me off the IV towers. I would go inside the hospital. There was like a little courtyard within the walls of the hospital. And I would just walk in circles, and I could only make it about 5 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, without huffing and puffing and bent over, sweating profusely. I'm incredibly sick. I'm overly infected. I'm overly medicated. I've got out of surgery twice, and I haven't exercised in 40 some years. I'm about 47 at this point. Every single day they take me off, I go and walk for as long as I can actually walk outside in the courtyard, which again is only 5 minutes. So I go back upstairs, and now they're starting to notice that I'm benefiting from their efforts, from the surgeries, and my infections declining, and I'm starting to win, where my body's starting to win the fight. Now I'm in about 11 days in the hospital, and I make it. I actually make it out. The doctors tell me on day 3, you're not going to make it. Get your things in order, financially speaking, help your wife get set up for her and the children, tell them your goodbyes. You're just not going to make it out of here. I make it out. And I figure I have a chance here. Like I just beat the odds, and in my favor, without drugs or alcohol or cigarettes for the first time in my life since 8th grade. And I'm like, I can't give up on this opportunity. I can't burn this gift that I've earned. And I'm not going to say earned in a positive way, but the doctors gave me this gift. God gave me this gift. I managed to make it. I didn't die. I should have died. 11 days in the hospital, I get out. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, mind you, from this. along with all of the bad habits that I'd had, right? Burning money because who gives a shit? I just kept buying more drugs and more alcohol. I get home and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to begin. I didn't know how to help myself. I didn't know how to stay out of the same situations and go back to the old habits that I've known since I was in 8th grade. So I figured what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two things. Every single day, I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and take a walk. And that's what I did. And right outside my house, I lived in this neighborhood where there was, from my doorstep, if I took a right and went around the circle around the neighborhood back to my door, it was about 1.35, 1.4 miles. And every day, one time a day in the morning, I would get up and take this walk. And it was the most agonizing walk of my life. I was in pain. I was out of shape. I could barely make it. Halfway through the walk, I wanted to quit and stop, and I never let myself. Rain, shine, cold, it never mattered. I just kept walking. And I managed to begin to feel like I can take and make my walk without absolutely feel like I'm going to collapse by the end of it. And about a week into this, I'll never forget. I'm struggling because I want to drink. I want to do more drugs. I want to go out and buy cigarettes. I want to go back to my old habits because life is easier over there in my mind. And it was a rainy, cloudy day. I'll never forget. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through my walk. And I started to bawl in the middle of the street, like heaving. And I just didn't know what to do. I felt like this is the day I'm going to fail. This is the day I'm going to die because I'm going to go back to all of my old habits because my body was screaming at me to do that. My mind was screaming at me to do that, to take the easy way out. And a little cloud opened up and a little tiny bit of sunshine came down through the clouds and it kind of hit me in the face. And it was my father who had passed. He passed away in 2001 and my grandparents on both sides. So I have a lot of loved ones in heaven. And I felt like that moment in the rain, the clouds parted a little bit for me and hit me in the face and that sunshine was their love, their hug, their support, telling me, just keep going. Don't quit. Don't go back. You can do this. It's hard, but you can do it. You can make it. And this is my father. He would have said, don't be a fucking pussy. Like, just keep going. And I did. And it was really hard. And I just finished that walk and I said, you know what? I'm going to add a second walk. So I would walk in the morning, that one lap. And then in the afternoon, right around lunchtime, I would take that same walk a second time. And then a month goes by and now I'm at a morning walk, an afternoon walk, and then an evening walk. And going from absolutely nothing to about 6 miles a day. Roughly, because I would add cover a little bit of extra miles, here and there in the walk just to keep going. And I started to feel better. And mentally, I noticed that I'm starting to get mentally the little bit of strength that you need to kind of stare down the fight and give you the emotional and spiritual control that you need to continue this fight. And I started to collect myself and feel better. And still hadn't drank. Hadn't smoked, hadn't done any drugs. And this is about a month in. So I started, I'm going to add bike riding. And then I started to, ride my bike a mile or two on top of my 3 walks. And then I went from, my 3 walks a day for about 5 to 6 miles a day, then adding a 5-mile bike ride a day. And now this is from a guy who's now, I'm a little over 50. I'm 50 plus, not quite 51. I turned 50 in December, but my entire life was spent destroying my body, not taking care of it in any way, shape, or form, eating whatever I wanted. And it was just ridiculous. On top of all of the alcoholism and the drug addiction and everything else. Now I'm walking like 5 or 6 miles a day and I'm biking 5 miles a day. I had a nurse with me the first month at home. I had a PICC line put in and they would have to come and flush out the PICC line and change things out and make sure that it was clean and not infected. And it was really scary for a little while there because you're not quite out of the woods after the infection and your body is depleted from all of its natural florins, for lack of a better way to put it. So your body is like fighting its way back from less than zero from a recovery perspective because they blow you out with so much medication. But I'm starting to feel better. They take the PICC line out and that heals. About a month after that, I decided I'm going to push myself really hard, and I added boxing. Not punching your face, go spar with people boxing, but I joined title boxing, and I would go do the boxing workouts, and I went every single day at 5:30 in the morning. At first I only went once or twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, because I couldn't physically handle it. I was completely fatigued, and I couldn't deal with the fight and what would happen to me. So, from overtraining, and then slowly but surely, I've realized that I could go 3 days a week consistently to boxing, plus my walk, plus my biking. Then it ends up at the end of all this, and about a year after, I'm not dead. I hadn't had a drink, I hadn't had a smoke, and I hadn't had any drugs. And now I'm biking 5 miles a day, walking 5 miles a day, and boxing 8 rounds is about an hour of boxing a day, 7 days a week. Could not believe it. And everything changed. Everything turned around. I made it at that moment. And I said that I not only was the luckiest person, God helped me get through it. I had the strength to survive it in terms of building up my own positive routines from a physical perspective, because I do believe that recovery is physical, spiritual, emotional, and there's a layer of like a religious tone for me. And I did not go to AA, so I don't like to pretend that I went to AA, but I say that I do truly believe that in higher power, and God helped me. God gave me the strength and the wherewithal to continue the fight, to give me the strength to fight the fight. And I made it. But a year in, and it's been 3 years now, almost 3 years. And because I felt so good in my recovery and what it's done for me, and I was able to break the chain, the cycle that my father had established for me, again, entirely my addiction, entirely my problem. I own 100% of it. I blame no one, all my bad choices, all my shit. But I broke the chain. I broke what was the playbook that I was given, and I held on to and duplicated, manifested, and was going right down that path for my kids. They would have lived exactly my life had I not stopped. And thankfully, the best single thing that ever happened to me is almost dying in the hospital to give me the strength to put it all down, because I do believe that it has to come from you. Yes, you quit for your loved ones, but you have to quit and recover for yourself entirely. And I had the strength because I wanted to be a better person. I wanted to be a better man for myself, a better person for myself, a better father, a better husband. And I had all of those things helping me get through it. And I am proud to say that I'm here today. I've launched my podcast. I'm not going to mention the name because that's not important, but my podcast, I dedicate it to helping other people find their path, get back on a path, or stay on the path to recovery through stories of people just like us who have made it and come and tell their story on the show. And I started it to help others. And I'm sad to say this one thing. I feel like my show helps me more than maybe the guests or the people that listen. And I feel bad about that, because my intention for the show is truly to help others find the joy that I had in recovery. Because not only is my life 1,000% better, I am happier. I live a simpler life. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't do drugs. I am able to be present every single moment in my entire life. My relationship across everything and everyone in my life has improved. And I've gotten rid of a lot of noise and chaos in my life and lost a lot of relationships intentionally that weren't good. And I'd learned to understand the difference between people that were party friends and people that were genuine friends. And I'm grateful that, I've lost a lot of wonderful people in my life to my bad habits who just stopped calling and hanging out because I was a piece of shit. At the end of the day, I've recovered some of those and some I haven't. And the ones I haven't, that's fine too. They'll come around or they won't. But I'm here to say that I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to tell my story. I'm grateful that I can live and lead my life by example for my children, to give them the opportunity to choose to not drink because I'm not drinking. Because I do believe that, especially with your children, they do what you do. And if they see me drinking every day or doing drugs or smoking or whatever it is, they would do exactly those things. And I'm grateful to at least give them the opportunity to not be like me in that regard. But here I am, and I'm proud to be here. I'm always nervous that my story is kind of boring, to be truthful. So I'm hopeful, and I always get a little anxious. My story is episode 1 on my podcast. So if there's more detail in there than I probably shared, because I get a little anxious, even as a podcast host, for some reason, being a guest on other shows or participating in groups like this one that are wonderful, I get a little nervous in my own head. So forgive me if I jumped around a little bit or it wasn't linear in the telling. I do apologize for that. But I'm grateful to be here. I'm honored to be here. And I spend my life trying to help other people just like us every single day.
Dopey.